name is Monica Moore. I'm a registered dietitian in Southern Maine. Today we're going to be talking about a brief nutrition overview of a low sodium diet in 5 minutes or less. So a low sodium diet might be something that was recommended to you for general health, or it could be something that you're doing to help with a disease state or a medical condition that you have, such as high blood pressure, congestive heart failure, heart disease, kidney disease, or general leg swelling. All of those things would be improved by a low sodium diet, and typically a doctor would recommend that. When we think about sodium, most people think, oh, there's not that much in the food that we eat. It's fine. All I need to do is just stop adding salt to my food, get rid of the salt shaker, and I'm good to go. But as we've learned, that's not really the case. So when we start thinking about sodium, sodium finds its way in lots of our food items, both natural foods and our processed and packaged foods. So when we're thinking about a low sodium diet, we have to pay extra attention, but that doesn't mean that we need to sacrifice the quality of our food or the taste of our food to do that. So low sodium diet is considered a diet that's 2,000 milligrams of sodium or less. To put that into perspective, the average American recommendation for sodium is 2,300 milligrams. So a low sodium diet is not tremendously less than the average American should be eating anyway. But the average American does typically consume over 3,000 milligrams of sodium a day, which is a huge difference from what we should be eating. So when we're thinking about a low sodium diet, it becomes extra important to be paying attention because the American diet, unfortunately, is higher in sodium due to our high intake of processed foods, canned goods, things like that. So now that we know the number, 2,000 milligrams or less, although your doctor may tell you a different number, lower than that if needed, and obviously follow whatever they're saying. This is just a basic low sodium diet education today and starting point. When we think about that, the first thing we want to do is toss that salt shaker. If we're adding salt to our food, 1 teaspoon of table salt is 2,300 milligrams of sodium. That's more than our daily allowance for a low sodium diet, and hits our maximum for a daily allowance for a healthy adult that's not watching their sodium intake. So without using salt, flavoring food can still be fun. We can still use things like Mrs. Dash, garlic, pepper, onions, thyme, rosemary, all kinds of great spices and seasonings out there that we can use that aren't salt. Basically anything but salt. So when we think about other foods and we kind of get rid of the salt shaker and stop adding it to our cooking, the other foods that contain salt are the things that we need to be paying attention to. Some of our big offenders can be things like canned goods, processed goods, frozen items, pickles, processed meats and cheeses, such as deli meats, bacon, sausage, ham, Cheese Whiz, American craft cheese slices. All of those things tend to be very processed and very high in sodium. The sodium acts as a preservative. It keeps it fresh so it can sit in your fridge for a really long time. If you think about those craft cheese slices, those American yellow cheese slices, those are loaded with sodium, over 400 milligrams per slice. But when we think about them, they can sit in our fridge for months without developing any mold on them like regular cheese would. That should be a warning sign that there's too much salt. So once we avoid those big offenders, then we start looking at the food labels, and that's really where we need to be for a low sodium diet, is looking at our food labels. So once we start looking at food labels, the world opens up to be able to still have some of these food items without giving them up completely, but just modifying the portion to make them work in your day. So for instance, if we were to look at a food, crackers, for instance, and the serving size is 6 crackers, and then we look down and the sodium content is 200 milligrams of sodium for those 6 crackers. We can eat them, or we could say, you know what, they're not really worth that much sodium to me. I'm gonna eat half. I'm gonna eat 3 crackers for 100 milligrams of sodium and call it a day. Or you could say, I love these crackers, I need them. And so you have double the amount for double the sodium, but still 400 milligrams a day of those crackers from the sodium content. So we know, all right, we just have to be a little more careful the rest of the day to make it work and stay under our 2,000 milligrams. Looking at those food labels can also help determine foods that you just can't make work or don't want to, such as frozen pizza, for instance. 1 slice of frozen pizza can be as high as 500 or 600 milligrams of sodium. So is that frozen pizza really worth it? Maybe it is, and you stick to the 1 slice. Maybe it's not, and you find a better option. So when we start thinking about a low sodium diet, those are some easy tips and tricks to start lowering our sodium intake. We still might need some additional guidance down the road, but it's a great starting point. I hope that you found that helpful in 5 minutes or less. And to those reviewing this at Dietitians on Demand, thank you for your consideration for this project.